anyway, I really struggled with what to say tonight. I had started writing this stuff down the night before Rebecca went on. She took my spot. And she had spoken a lot of the things that I had wrote out already. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just come up with a little message. Honestly, I didn't want to talk about myself. And if I'm being really honest, I just thought it was stupid. I'm like, ugh, this is so stupid. I don't want to do that. They know me, I don't know. But then when we came in for Rebecca, Samuel had that graphic up. And I looked at Jeff and I said, was that up last week when Trisha spoke? And of course, he had no clue. And I said, I don't think it was. And so then I asked Samantha, it wasn't. And she's like, no, I don't think it was. Well, that is what I had been writing when I had wrote. I kept calling it my story, my story. And so I made some random comment to Samantha like, oh, I feel like a fraud, Samuel's got that up. Rebecca's already said half of the things I want to say. And she's like, no, just look at it like it's confirmation. And I'm like, fine. So, here we go. Once upon a time. No. Long ago, I had been asked to speak. And I think at that time, I had begun to consider telling my story. And I had said something to someone, and they had said, why? And I just think about where your mind can go with that for a minute. When you say, I'm going to speak about me, and they say, why? The devil is such a liar. So I felt like the Lord said to me after agonizing over this one, that every story is important. Your story might not be huge and full of dirt or drama or God's big booming voice, calling you up out of the muck and mire. But each of our stories are important and they all matter. Not all stories will feel like a big, powerful story, but they're all significant. And they are significant because the Lord says they are big and powerful. Each of us came to the Lord when the world was against this. And our stories tell where you have been and where you came from and how you ended up his own. And how you were turned into or called son or daughter. So, a brief story about me. And I promise I'm going to be much shorter than last week. Where's Philip? I was born in northern small town, South Dakota, to a teenage mom. She just turned 17. She was not following the Lord at that time, but she knew without a shadow of doubt that she was going to have me and that she was going to keep me, despite what others might have been pressuring her to do. Like I said, she wasn't following the Lord, but my whole family was German, so I was baptized in the Lutheran church when I was an infant. Goodness. So needless to say, things were far from easy in my early part of my childhood. We didn't have much support from her family, so her friends kind of became our family. She worked her behind off to support us, but I don't think I ever went without anything. And if I did, I didn't know it because I was little. We might not have had the biggest and the best or the gourmet things, but I always had food to eat and toys to play with. To make matters harder, my mother got into a work accident, I think when I was 2 or 3, and spent some time in the hospital in Minnesota. But kind of a cool story came out of that. I don't know if many of you know, but she was one of the first few people to have this specific surgery. So if you have any questions about that, I won't go into detail now, but you can ask me later. It's kind of neat. Yeah. But about that time, actually, my mom met my dad, and they started dating, and I call him my dad because he's my father. And he has been since I was like 2 or 3. They started dating, and we moved to Texas when I was about, 5. I started kindergarten in Texas. We moved into this little trailer park in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And in this trailer park, there was this little lady. I could not tell you much about this lady, except I thought she was old. And she knitted me a sweater. And when I tried to wear this sweater, it was really itchy. And so I never wore it again. Thank you, sensitive skin. But apparently this lady wasn't a little old lady, but a middle-aged woman, Hispanic woman, who seemed to take an interest in me. She told me about God. And again, I couldn't tell you what she said, but she did have an impact on me. I went home one day, and I told my parents that we needed to pray before we ate. So we blessed the food that night. For some crazy reason, I think about this woman off and on, and I thank the Lord for her, that she'd sown seeds in me. And she probably knew what she was doing. But in talking with my mother last week when I was in Missouri, I guess around this time, she said, and I'm not for sure on the details, if it was her or both my parents, she started to try to read the Bible. And this story just shows you how important a church and a church family are, because they didn't have this. But so as a non-Christian, she started trying to read the Bible, and she said she couldn't really understand it. She didn't understand the context, and some of the things that she was reading without any of this understanding kind of turned her off. Okay, so not following the Lord, some seeds have been planted, probably in all 3 of us. First grade, we move again. We move to Missouri. And a year goes by, and the lease is up on our first place that my parents have been renting. And they're planning on moving into this other house. We'd already gone. They did the deposit. We went and cleaned. And one day while my mom was at work, my dad decided that this place and this neighborhood were not safe for me to be outside playing in, and that we were not going to move there. He went and talked to somebody else about a different house, and my mom got off work, and he took her over there and told her, hey, this is the house that we will be renting. We're not going to move into that other one. And that was that. The landlords actually live next door. God, guys, this is all God. They were very wonderful people. I don't know how long we actually lived there. I was trying to think about that today, but I don't know. My father got into an accident. This was 30-some years ago. He was electrocuted and burned and fell off of a metal ladder and had to be life-flighted to Springfield, which was about an hour away from where we were living. And these people showed us, not after the accident, but the whole time that we were involved with them, just the love of Christ. They were wonderful. They kept me at their house. They babysat me until my aunt could come down from South Dakota. My mom was in Springfield. They provided her with lodging. They went and set up a little camper in the hospital parking lot, which This is against the rules, and you can't do that. They didn't charge a rent. I mean, the list goes on. And needless to say that we stayed in touch with this family pretty much for the rest of their lives. They were older. We would go down and spend Easters with them and their grandkids after that. So, I mean, they were a very big part of our lives. It was pretty special. So after my father got in the accident, shortly thereafter, we moved to Springfield to be closer to him. He spent months in the hospital, and, to have good facilities for him to recover at. We needed to be in Springfield. So here comes my first church experience. My next door neighbor in this trailer park that we moved into, again, evidently went to an Assemblies of God church. Yes. So the church would send around a bus throughout the trailer park and pick up kids. And I really liked going to church on Wednesday nights. It was fun, and they had kids' classes, and it was good. And then one day, I went with my neighbor, my friend, to a Sunday morning service, and I was traumatized. I don't remember anything. I don't remember the worship. I don't remember the service. The only thing that I remember at 8 years old was the pastor said something to the congregation. Again, couldn't tell you what. And then they all started speaking really weird. And that was it for me. I was done. I was freaked out. I had no clue what was going on. Nobody explained anything. And that was over. That was my first charismatic experience, and it was a total bust. It was awesome. I was like, what is this? Never went back. So the years go by, and probably thanks to my praying grandma, my parents decide that it's time to come to Jesus. I'm about 15, 16, and 15, 16-year-old Jessica was not really interested in this point. I was living in the world, I was having fun, and it didn't help that some of the people helping with the youth were not the best influence. They are now pastors and probably have been convicted from the Holy Spirit. So we won't air their dirty laundry. But I wasn't having it. I went with them on Sunday mornings until I started working on the weekends. And looking back after have been in church, I realized that during worship, during this time, the Holy Spirit almost always moved on me. But I had no clue what was happening, and nobody explained it. And I don't really think anybody else knew themselves what was happening. But almost every time during worship, I would try so hard not to cry. And it was just really annoying to a 16-year-old, Oh, especially, when you do, yes. And I'm going to be honest right now, the worship was not great. It was nothing like what we have here. It was a dude on a guitar, a dude on the drums, and one of them was singing. Was not good. So that was my experience as a teenager. I started working at a breakfast restaurant every weekend, so I kind of stopped going with them. Yeah, I know. I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have, and I pretty much fully lived in the world. But I know he had a hook in me. So it really makes your mouth dry. So a couple years after high school, I moved up to Kansas City for a boy. Not that one. About a year into living up there, I came to the conclusion one day that I cannot marry this guy. He does not believe in God. And I look back and I think, that is such a weird thing to think. Because I wasn't following the Lord. I didn't go to church. I wasn't reading my Bible, but I just knew I cannot marry this person because he doesn't know the Lord and he probably never will. So I pretty much ended things there shortly after. And I kid you not more than 2 or 3 months later, I met Jeff. And some of you might know that story. I won him in a coin contest. These are facts. Heads. I won. About a year later, we were married. Monday, we celebrated 19 years. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. When I was pregnant with Juliana, we started going to a little AOG church, another one, and I don't think I was really interested in that either. We had Juliana. Jacob was born 2 years later. When Jacob was maybe 2-3 months old, Jeff receives a job offer to Northern Virginia, and I was not happy about this. And I'm positive I cried. I did. I did not want to move, especially that far away from my family. But we ended up moving, and I hated Northern Virginia. The people were rude, it was expensive, and I didn't know a soul, despite trying multiple online mom groups. That was the thing you did then. And my husband traveled a lot, once a month, close, roughly. And of course, I got pregnant again within a couple months. So we then had 3 kids, 3.5 years old and younger. Yeah. During that time, maybe before Jameson was born, he found a church about 45 minutes away, something like that. And I know a lot of people poo-poo seeker-sensitive churches, but I have an appreciation for them. This church was most definitely seeker-sensitive, but the pastor was good. They had many different programs, and they did a whole lot for the community. And I truly believe that this was probably the best fit for me in that season of life. It got me in the doors. It got me thinking about God. It got me wanting to go to these events. And God needs all different kinds of churches. I believe that different churches are called to do different things. And not everyone is called to serve meat consistently. Just think of when someone's out evangelizing. You don't go and have a deep theological conversation and get people, win them over to God that way, typically. God needs to bottle feed some people until they're able to transition to another season. And then hopefully go find one of those churches that serve the meat and potatoes. It's just a matter of you being willing and obedient to actually move on when he tells you to. Well, we didn't have to be told to move on because God would just move us and plant us elsewhere. Again. So in about 2010, we moved to Farmville for another job offer Jeff had received. And I know many of you know the story about how we got to APC, so I won't go into a lot of detail, I don't think. Pauline's laughing. We visited APC, and we both thought, there is no way we are driving to Lynchburg to go to church. We were probably the youngest people with the only little children. And according to Jeff, we tried many churches in Farmville. And I don't remember that, to be honest. I only remember the Assemblies of God church. That is all I remember going to. There's like a theme. They're all AOG. Yeah. I noticed that when I was writing all this down. I'm like, you are so funny, Lord. So Jeff says to me out of the blue one day, he says, well, the Lord told me to drive to Lynchburg to go to church. He said, basically, you can do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to Lynchburg. So we drove to church and home an hour each way for about 10 years. Yeah. That's really fun when you have little children. It's a lot. But not until coming here did God become more, not only Lord and Father to me, but life. Does that make sense? It's just so much more than coming on Sunday morning and checking that box. It's about the constant communication and relationship with Him. It's about surrender and thinking about Him all the time and how you live your life for Him. And I just wish that everybody knew this and experienced Him that way. And this doesn't have to be here. I'm just saying here is where it happened for me. I have grown so much since we started coming here. Life is so much easier, and there's so much more peace when you know the Lord. You realize that He's in charge of everything and that He is good and always with you despite how you may feel. He's our hope, our joy, our reassurance, and I can't imagine doing life without that faith and trust in Him. These past few weeks have really solidified this. I saw so much pain and suffering and hurting people when we were in the neurotrauma ICU with my dad. Me and my mom were talking and we were just, wondering out loud how people can watch their loved one go through something like this, it being so hard and traumatic, and they not having the Lord and that peace to lean on. I mean, it was devastating. You just feel so bad for these people. So ministry, let alone my husband becoming a pastor, that was never a thought in my mind when we got married, or many, many years later. So one of the first times that I visited APC, and this was before we started going there, here, but there on Langhorne. It's like, yeah. I had been having a conversation. I think I was driving to Virginia from Missouri with the 3 kids. And just, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I, Lord, what am I called to? And I never really heard anything. So I just came to the conclusion that, well, maybe I'm just to be a mother. I love my kids and my family and would do anything for them. So maybe that's what He has for me, to raise these little human beings into amazing adults. So the first time that I came, I got a prophetic word, and I only remember the beginning of it because repeated my words, and it started out, you are not just a mother. You are so much more. And that's where you lost me because, those were my words. But I always knew deep down that there was more for me. And I will be really honest with you. I still don't know what that big burning passion of mine is in ministry yet, but that doesn't mean that the Lord can't use me and anybody else in that meantime. So being a pastor's wife, it's kind of a weird dynamic. Oh boy. Like I said, no thoughts of ministry when we got married. I didn't choose ministry, but I did choose to support my husband. And it's had its highs and it's had its lows, just like anything else. And I'll get on my little soapbox, but I feel like there are a lot of expectations put on pastors' wives. Some vocalized, some implied, and just some weird things people expect. And that can be hard to navigate at times, my friends. And I think this is why I really try to love people exactly where they are in that moment. I don't want them to feel judged for where they are or where they're not, or what somebody thinks that they should be doing. I always want to make them feel loved and listened to and heard. And now don't get me wrong, as a leader, I know we're to try and help them through their muck, and ultimately, I feel like that's between them and the Lord, and I'm not going to be devastated in whichever path that they choose, because you can't make someone choose to give their whole life to the Lord. It's just not my decision to make. It's not something for me to put pressure on them when their hearts are not in it. So you can't be everything to everyone. That's the Lord's job. And you have to be who God says you are. And be happy with that. And let all that other stuff just fall to the wayside. If we were everything to everyone, there would be no need for others. And that's not how the church body is made to function. We're to work as a team, together, in unison. So, funny story. This morning, I literally finished typing everything out, and I got distracted, and I started cleaning something, and my computer went to sleep. This is my life. And I'm like, oh, gosh. You know, when it turns off, you can see all the stuff on the screen. So I'm like, goodness, I need to Windex that. So I start cleaning that, and then I'm like, well, I need to clean the keyboard. And it's off. And all of a sudden, I hear Tony Soldano. And I'm like, what the world? You are off. But no, it's playing a word from Tony to me. Yes, and it basically says, Jessica, you be you. You do you. Yeah. I was like, okay, I hear you, Lord. I hear you. Yeah, and that's not the first time I ever received that word. And another thing is, I got a little Dove chocolate. And what did it say? Be you to full. I'm like, okay, you're really funny. So, look, babe, it's 7:35. I only have like 2 pages left. No, 1. So, in hindsight, I can absolutely look back over my life and see how God provided, how he orchestrated, how he moved in my life even before I was truly following him. My parents, we were poor, but we always had food on the table. Even if that Friday night was hot dogs and beets, that was a real thing. Yeah, I know you're jealous. And I still like those beets out of the can, just saying. Thank you. Jeff and I, we always had more than enough when we lived in Northern Virginia on one median income. We always had enough. How the Lord protected us from making mistakes or choosing little things that were just outside of his will. Comes to mind that house that we were trying to buy. And us realizing in the moment and giving it up to every move that we ever made, to finding the land for our future, lessons in patience and faithfulness, prayer, perseverance, perspective. God is so good and he's so faithful to his children. Everyone on this earth is his, and he's just patiently, for most, waiting for us to fully make that decision to surrender to him And then to keep surrendering each and every day. Having faith and trust in that he is who he says he is. And sometimes I feel bad and slightly guilty that it took me so long to fully surrender myself to him. But I guess such is the process. We have to go through it and come to the end of ourselves to fully know the Lord and to give him our life. And there's a big difference in knowing the Lord versus knowing of the Lord. And a lot of people know of the Lord, and they don't live their lives like they really know him. And I'm just so thankful that he's gracious and merciful and didn't let anything happen to me until I realized all these things for myself. And that's all I've got to say about that. To be continued. ...